Hi, everybody. Welcome to the USA Libraries Art Galleries talk today. Our speaker today is Jamie Stanfield. She's talking about healthcare graphic novels for Gen Z. And I don't know where Image is. Hi, Jamie. Welcome. So our speaker is Jamie. She is with the University of Southern Mississippi. I've got her information down there at the bottom. I'll feature it again later on today so you can reach her if you want to learn more about this, or if you yourself want to have a presentation with lovely Miss Jamie. Thank you so much for doing this for us today. Now we will take questions via chat after the presentation. So please place your questions there and we will ask her after the presentation. Miss Jamie, thank you so much.
Thank you, Paula. I'm so happy to be here. This is the second part of a series I created called It Just Got Graphic. So I'm going to go ahead and start my PowerPoint and turn my camera off, and I'll talk to you a little bit as soon as I get it started. Okay, so as I said, I'm Jamie Stanfield. I'm going to be talking today about healthcare for Gen Z. It just got graphic. If you have attended my other series presentation, it's called Healthcare, It Just Got Graphic. Today we're going to be looking at some things specifically aimed or relevant to our Generation Z demographic. And if you are familiar with Gen Z, you'll know that there are some discrepancies about the dates, but I think most can agree somewhere in the mid-1990s to almost present or a few years earlier. This is our Generation Z demographic. So I'd like to thank the University of South Alabama for having me again, the Libraries and Art Galleries, and Charles M. Baugh Biomedical Library. And today you're really going to be getting a brand new series because this is my very first impression on all of these novels. But I am located at the University of Southern Miss in beautiful Long Beach. I'm at the Gulf Coast Library. And again, I work for the University of Southern Mississippi, and I'm the Science, Nursing, and Health Librarian. So first we have to talk about what is graphic medicine. And graphic medicine is the intersection of the medium of comics and the discourse of healthcare. And that was a phrase coined by Dr. Ian Williams. But basically, it's comics meets healthcare. And no matter what demographic graphic medicine is aimed at, it stands for all that it is a very unique outlet for telling a story that you're typically never going to see in the medical books, but where this is going to specifically relate to our Generation Z audience is you're not going to find these types of stories in some of the information outlets like WebMD. We know that Generation Z has so much information that is available to them at the touch of the fingertip, but a lot of times these types of stories that can be so meaningful and so personal, you're not going to just necessarily find on your everyday medicine websites. And what makes graphic medicine so unique is it gives you a different perspective. So it might be written by someone who experienced an illness or who experienced some type of healthcare journey. It could be written by the family members of that person who experienced that particular journey. And sometimes it's even written by the caregivers themselves, such as nurses, doctors, social workers, and other types of caregivers, home assistants, and a different myriad of caregivers. But it's a very, very personal experience that you're not typically going to find anywhere else. Now, these are the 4 new books that I'm going to roll out and talk about today. And what I immediately noticed about them is I could not tell, except for one, if they were fiction or nonfiction just by reading them. And I thought that that was very, very significant, because if you don't know, if you can really relate to that and you're wondering, wow, did the author go through this? Then that means that it's already doing its job by becoming a personal experience for you. And because there is so much information available to our Generation Z demographic, they're not going to take a lot of variables. They want the information to be meaningful, and they want it now. So these are the 4 books that we're going to talk about. And of the 4, only one of them is actually nonfiction. And that is the last one, called RX, or Prescription, a Graphic Memoir. And the reason that I selected these books is because the people that are represented in them are young people and dealing with things that our young adults and teenagers deal with on a daily basis at times. And so, in addition to having that personal story with graphic medicine, it also gives you a connection. So sometimes when I was a nurse or even a nursing student, maybe I couldn't really empathize with what some of my patients were going through. However, if I was to read a particular book, let's say about young women having children, perhaps when I was a labor and delivery nurse and I was working with young women, sometimes 14, 15, 16, 17 years old, perhaps I could have had a better understanding if I would have had some of these types of materials available to me. As far as today's generation of healthcare workers, and we are seeing Generation Z become the latest and greatest healthcare workers, and also the students that are studying to become healthcare workers. And then finally, just take healthcare workers out of the picture, and let's just talk about people that have the same types of illness. It really gives you an empathetic understanding and a connection that you are not going to get from WebMD or from your textbooks or from any of your online studying resources for the most part. Like with any other graphic novel, graphic medicine appeals to visual learners because of the pictures and because of that particular way of storytelling that is less prose and more picture and symbolism and things that you can relate to. In addition, it's also going to continue to draw in reluctant or poor readers. If for some reason you have problems reading about Alzheimer's disease that your grandfather has in WebMD or on another site, you could possibly get a graphic medicine book about Alzheimer's and have a little bit better understanding. And then thereby that's going to increase your health literacy just for having exposed yourself to such materials that you may not have a better understanding if you're attempting to read about the medical terminology and the way that it's presented. And so when I talk about health literacy and I say that graphic medicine is going to increase health literacy, I guess we have to figure out, or I have to tell you, what does that actually mean? And believe it or not, Gen Zers are very health literate because they do have so much information available to them. They're very active in their health care. So the Institute of Medicine says that health literacy is the degree to which individuals have the capacity to obtain, process, and understand basic health information and services needed to make appropriate health decisions. And if you have attended my other presentation, you'll notice that we talked about this as well. This applies to Generation Z just like it applies to any other demographic. We have to have them not only have the capacity, so therefore they need to have the ability to obtain health information. We have to have them with insurance, with clinics, with doctors, and of course, a lot of the time they're going to be looking for this on the internet. So we have to give them the capacity to obtain. Once they obtain the health information, they need to know how to process it and understand it so that they can make the best decisions for their health care. And that may be different services. And again, they're going to constantly, before they leave that doctor's office, they will be looking up the conversation and the high points of what was discussed if they didn't understand it. So we need to make sure that they can understand the basic health information, and we need to make sure that they have the information at their fingertips and that it's the correct information and that they can relate to that information. And that's where some of your more official type websites are going to turn them off. So graphic medicine can be a way that not only introduces them to some basic health information, but then we'll encourage them to go further into detail about that particular information that they're looking up. Now, we talked about how about 9 out of 10 adults may lack proficient health literacy to manage their own health and illness. There's not a lot of studies that have been done so far on Generation Z and health and illness and their health literacy. There are some that are coming out, but it stands to reason that because only 38% of high school seniors are reading at or above proficient levels, that we have to assume that health literacy may very well be low in our Generation Z adults and even children, because the one thing that we see with Generation Z that you're not going to see with a lot of other demographics except for millennials is that they become involved with their healthcare at a much younger and younger age. You will see all different types of medical comics that are specifically aimed at younger children, even getting out of the idea of graphic medicine. There are games that children can play that have something to do with medicine or healthcare. They can see cartoons. Even Dora the Explorer hurts herself. You have Doc McStuffin. So we have lots and lots of stimuli about healthcare that our children and our young adults are constantly being exposed to at a younger and younger age. So when we talk about Generation Z and health literacy, we already know that they tend to get a lot of their health information online. They would prefer emailing their physician and having a conversation and using technology than necessarily going into the clinic for a one-on-one visit. Now, because they do have higher access to internet in that they typically have smartphones and smaller technology, unlike some of us who may have the laptop or desktop, they are constantly looking things up. And so we know that a little over half of them already prefer telemedicine, which we've seen increase dramatically since we have all been experiencing the COVID pandemic. Another thing that I found interesting was that 70% of the Gen Z demographic watch YouTube up to 2 hours daily. So that is a pretty significant amount of time to be spending watching various videos. I would be willing to bet that that might even have increased a little bit from the date that I got this particular information in the current atmosphere that we're living in. So only a little over half of Generation Z have what we call a primary care doctor. And a primary care doctor is the doctor that you go to see when you have some type of healthcare issue. 84% of baby boomers have a primary care doctor, and 76% of Gen X, which is myself, have a primary care doctor, that we rely on them to send us to a specialist when something is going on. Only half of Gen Z have a primary care doctor. And what that might suggest is going back to the fact that they have the ability to look up things and find a lot of information. They could just as easily have an idea of what's going on and find themselves a specialist or a different doctor to discuss whatever's happening with them. So we're seeing less and less people have the primary care doctor, and more people have different types of doctors depending upon what is going on with them. So a great way for anybody, but especially currently in our Gen Z generation, from teenagers to young adults, this is a great way for us to expose them to medical terminology, learning by audionyms. We can use this in graphic medicine not only for adults, but this is especially going to be helpful for adolescents, teens, and young adults and our Generation Z, because they're going to remember this for life. I learned these types of I learned audionyms in order to remember all of the root words, and I'm 47 years old and I still remember all of these, and I learned them when I was 18 years old. So it has stuck with me. So this group is a prime demographic to teach these types of terminology to, and they're not going to forget them. And we can find these types of things very easily, will accommodate themselves in graphic medicine. So you look at blepher and the audionym is blue fur, and you see a lady who's wearing blue fur and it has eyelids on it and then eyelid. Same with the root word gaster. That means stomach. Instead of a thing of gas, the gas truck is pulling a stomach, so gaster means stomach. It seems quite silly, but it is especially effective with this demographic. So now we're going to talk about the types of books that I felt would really, really speak to Gen Z. And the first book that we're going to talk about is First Year Out, A Transition Story. If you don't know anyone personally, I'm sure that you have heard a transition story and some of the issues that those involved face. So in this particular transition story about Lily, Lily tells her mother about what's going on. And sometimes parental reactions to this can vary significantly. But we do often hear about guilt, shame, blame, and you'll see all of those things on this very first page. And what I found very, very appealing about this particular book is the simplicity of the drawings, yet how powerful the story is. There's something I gravitate to about simplicity in graphic medicine. And Lily's mother says, I don't understand what I could have done wrong as a parent to cause you to be this way. So guilt, mom did something wrong. And Lily says, it's not because of anything you, me, or anybody else did. So then mom says, well, maybe it's a sex thing. Is it a sex thing? So let's blame it on something. So then we have blame. And of course, Lily says, no, I always felt this way long before sex, even at 4 years old, was on my mind. And then finally, mom says, it's just in your head. You know, this is the way it is. If you have a penis, you're a boy. If you have a vagina, you're a girl. That's just the way it is. So now we have somewhat of a shaming thing. Now, this is just the first page. And I would ask you to think about if you could see scenarios where this might already be challenged as inappropriate material and why. So imagine if this was possibly in a high school library, perhaps even if this was in some type of healthcare clinic, or in even just a counseling clinic. There are many different scenarios where this could and may be very easily challenged. And why? Because of the nature of the conversation. And right now, this happens to be something that is a pretty big conversation going on right now in society. And so even though we know that this is a work of fiction, I would ask you to really ask yourselves, is it? While the author may have not been this person, the mother, or perhaps they may have known someone, and this could be related to their story. And even if it was something that the author just thought up out of their own head, regardless, it's still discussing a very relevant fact of nonfiction that we discuss today. Now, as we go through the book, we see difficulties that Lily has that other people would never even think about. For example, just removing hair is an anxiety-provoking situation. So when you see Lily in the bathroom about to shave, it's clearly, you can see by her eyes and her mouth, this is definitely not something that she enjoys. She does not want that to be there. But still, I say, is a smooth face without hair a cultural idea of femininity? And if it is, is it not pushed on our young people that that's one of the only ways to accept you as feminine? But in any event, Lily goes to the electrolysis clinic to try and have this taken care of on a more permanent basis. And just the very fact that you have to wait without wearing makeup or shaving, she's got to come back in 6 weeks. This is not permanent at first. You can see by the end of this page that this too is very stressful for Lily. So just talking about something that many of us think of as the simplicity of hair removal, for Lily is a very difficult time. Difficult times go on, and this is where I say the rubber meets the road, so to speak. This is where the book begins to talk about some of the realities of transitioning. We talk about so many different types of hormone pills that Lily takes. And while that in and of itself may cause some decreased anxiety because of the emotional results and the physical results that hormone therapy can help somebody that is wishing to transition, there are also some things that it will not help. And all of us have likely heard sometime, you can always tell a male from a female by looking at the Adam's apple. So these are the types of things that Lily thinks about that aren't going to be changed, because some things don't change. Other things that Lily does are more permanent, such as surgeries. And here we see that Lily has had the sexual surgical changes and some of the difficulties that she goes through to have this. And so my thoughts when I began thinking about this, and you're getting my first impressions, I've only read these books one time. My first impression from this was, wow, could this possibly assist someone else who may not know some of the things that they have to go through to become what it is that they are inside? So difficult. It's such a difficult conversation to have. Again, I can also see more challenges in pages like this that people might challenge that this is unethical to have in particular areas, or certainly to teenagers or even young adults, and maybe even to older adults. Some people will argue that this is not appropriate. Now, Lily does end up having her happily ever after, and I will let you read that to find out what that is, but not before some more very real scenarios do take place that I feel like a lot of people could benefit from. The next book that we're going to talk about is called Black Hole. I didn't know it at the time, but this is a huge hit in literature classes in universities and colleges across the country. I knew that it won several awards. It was one of the reasons I chose it for our library, but I had not read the entire book until recently. It won the Eisner Award. It's won the Ignatz Award. It's won several awards, and there was a lot of talk about symbolism and lots of different things that people got from this particular graphic work. And I had the opportunity to read an interview with Charles Burns, and they asked him about the book, about the symbolism and things. And he said, not really. I was just writing about a time I had experienced for the most part. Now, I'm going to give you a little setting. This book is about teenagers and young adults right at the end of high school, early college, and it's set, though, in the 1970s. And so in the 1970s, you get the idea as you go through the book, because there's a lot of marijuana use, there's a lot of alcohol use, there's a lot of sexual activity. And what happens is there is an STD that occurs only among the teenagers, and it's called the bug. And you begin to see black holes in various pages and in various places and on various body parts throughout the book. And so far, that's kind of the symbolism, so to speak, that I got from this. Now, they can represent lots of things to different people, and that's the beauty of books like this. And there's no cure for it. And so some will go through a lot more changes, and it'll be obvious that they have gotten the bug, while others not so obvious. But I would ask you to think about what a black hole might symbolize to teens and young adults. I could think of lots of different types of things it might symbolize, but that is the beauty of these types of work. So on one of the first pages, we have Keith, and I noticed that we have several pictures. The first one is a frog that's about to be dissected, and you can kind of see that it's an open area. There's black inside. It becomes a little bit more prominent on the foot where you see a clear opening. It is a black hole. But then next to that is an opening of someone's skin on their back. And within that first page, you're automatically going to see what appears as a belly button with a hand over genitalia. That belly button may or may not represent the belly button, or it could be another black hole. I would leave that up to you, but very, very quickly we start to see these images throughout the book. Now, there's a lot of judgment that's occurring in this book, not just from the parents, but even among the young people themselves. So here on this page, we have a young man, and he is in love with a fellow teen, and her name is Chris. And in the first thoughts, he's like, how could she do it? And what he's meaning by that is somehow manage to get the bug. Because he goes on to tell you, and this is where we see the first mention of the bug, that the only way you can get it is by having sex with a sick kid. So it's not among the adults, so to speak, it's among the young people only. And remember, if you're old enough, what was happening in the 70s. So that's kind of relevant, but I think it still has a powerful message to today's young adults as well. And in any event, on the next page, he says, I knew she was sick, but I didn't care. If anything, I thought maybe it would give me a little bit more of a chance with her. And that made me stop to think, okay, so already we have judgment. So if Chris has the bug, and she did have all of these young men pining away after her to take her out on a date or whatever, by getting the bug, he knows she's going to be judged and people aren't going to want to be with her, but he's willing to do that. And if you notice, we have a black hole opening up in his hand. Now, these are all images that are going on in his head because he's thinking about this while having a conversation in the car with his friend. So he goes on to say, how dumb can you get? When I first saw her, she was still nice and polite. So, there's a lot of judgment going on, even though he proclaims not only does he love Chris, but he's willing to get the bug just to be with her if she would give him the chance. But she just disappears. And so throughout the book, what we see is mutations of sort. We will see young people with a tail. That was their mutation. You will see people that have a hole that turns into a talking mouth in someone's neck. It's just, I'm not exactly sure how I feel about this the first pass around, and I might be missing things, but that's the great thing about going back and reading these books over and over. But it's clear that there's still relevant issues. The last thing of this book that I'll share with you is the front and back cover. So the front cover shows the teens, the young adults in their yearbook with their picture, smiling, happy, fresh and lovely. And then the back cover shows clear issues of students that had the bug. Now, most of the students aren't going to be in the yearbook this way because whenever they started showing signs, they would have to leave home. They were ostracized from the community, and they were literally living in the woods because they were not accepted by their own parents. They would have rather left and make their parents think that they had just run away than even possibly being exposed. So there was a lot of secrecy that was going on as well. And a lot of them didn't really understand what was happening to them because they said, wow, we didn't learn about any of this in health class. And they were talking about the different films and work that they had done in their high school health class that had not prepared them for this. And I feel like that too is a relevant conversation that we still have to this day about what should children learn in school? What is the parent's job? Are we teaching them exactly what they need to know as young adults? Or are they finding this information out for themselves? And with the internet readily available to Generation Z, they are exposed to more types of information about sexual activity for the positive and the negative than any other generation before them. The next book that I want to introduce you to is called Mishadra. Now, this is a story of Isaac, who is just trying to be, as he calls it, a normal college student. We all know that normal is a subjective word that differs to all. But the reason Isaac wants to feel normal is because he's been diagnosed with and has lived with epilepsy. He has everything from what's called an aura to small seizures, which are called petit mal, to larger seizures, which are called grand mal, that even land him in the hospital. And with all of this, he's trying to go to college. And so very quickly, he starts to have seizures because college is a stressful time. Gen Z, again, they say over and over how much anxiety that they have. They've been born into a post 9/11 world. They've watched recessions. They're watching this pandemic. They report high levels of anxiety. Then you add the college years or even high school and all of the other things, and they are reporting a lot of anxiety. And so if you do have epilepsy, increased stress and anxiety can be triggers to cause seizure activity. And so Isaac had been having some seizures and had missed class. And I noticed that there was a phone message, and in the phone message basically was the professor giving other students a warning to give to Isaac that if he continued missing class, he was going to fail out. And I thought, my first thought working in a university was, oh my gosh, that's a terrible violation. Why didn't that professor talk to Isaac himself? And, those are the things that we're going to think about in the profession of university or high school or whatever. Even just a parent, they're not going to want their child to go through that. His peers being told this to come tell him. And so that's already even more stress because he's embarrassed. Now, as we go through the book, when Isaac begins to have auras that will either lead into a petit mal or sometimes a grand mal seizure, everything begins to turn red. And either you have blue lights, which I believe signifies the aura, or it turns into the bluish green knives that you can see where it says, no, don't, please don't. That, I believe, is the beginning of the seizure activity where he has various degrees. Of course, he's on medication, but he is taken to the hospital a few times because he does have some pretty heavily active seizures. And, excuse me, he is dismissed and ignored by doctors, which I think that a lot of Gen Z feel that way because they are armed with information when they do go to the doctor. They may very well already have some ideas of what's happening to them. In this case, Isaac knows what's going on. And he goes to the emergency room and the doctor says, it's just a little panic attack. You're a college student. Cut some anxiety out of your life. And they go back and forth and, he's 19 years old and they're talking about drugs. And finally, the doctor says, just go see a therapist. And Isaac is telling him, you're just not listening to me. You think I'm some 19-year-old kid that has no idea what's going on. And this happens a couple of times throughout the book. And so Isaac gets to a point at a few times where he just feels low. One doctor gives him a very powerful drug that literally he gives him 10 pills and tells him that should last him an entire year. That could be a whole nother presentation in and of itself. However, he only has a few left when he really feels his lowest that's discussed in the book. And he's trying to say, I'll be all right. But He talks about he's putting up with doctors that won't listen. He's taking medications that barely work on a daily basis. He's living the delicate balance of triggers, again, trying to live that college life. And it's just exhausting, not to mention the fact how exhausting and physically draining even aura or a petit mal seizure can be. And then if you go into grand mal, days of recovery time. So this is something that we don't really look at a lot in college students because sometimes we don't know, but this is definitely an anxiety and a stressor for Isaac just thinking about what he's going through. At the end of the book, this is the last page, and he says, I'm okay right now. Right now, I'm okay. I have a couple of pills left, but he knows that maybe he might not be tomorrow or the next day. He's trying to pull some strength, and the author just kind of leaves us with this. And we don't exactly know what happens with Isaac. And so again, 19-year-old college student, this is Gen Z right here in front of us. And I feel like if we have students that have seizure disorders or epilepsy, this might very well give them something that they can relate to. And more times than not, they are not going to tell anybody at that college that they have seizures if they can help it, because there is some stigma, real or perceived, that is associated with that as a society we have to overcome. But in any event, these are the types of things that we have to discuss with Generation Z. The last work that I'm going to talk with you about is Rachel's story. I had this in some of my other presentations about healthcare. It just got graphic, but I felt that it really, really represents some of the mental health questions and problems that Generation Z feels and poses. In this case, we have a young woman named Rachel, and she goes to work for the pharmaceutical company. This is a nonfiction story, by the way. And she's diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And she feels very quickly that her life has kind of become a vicious cycle. So she has a diagnosis, and in order to go see the doctor to get her medicine and to talk about what's going on with her, she has to have insurance to pay for the very, very expensive drugs. And then to continue this, she has to have a certain type of job. And she finds that this just becomes quite the cycle. And working for the pharmaceutical industry, and specifically in psychotropic drugs, in different types of drugs for anxiety, depression, we call those psychotropic drugs, kind of an umbrella. Can you imagine working for that industry while you're dealing with your own diagnosis of bipolar disorder? Really gives you some perspective that most of us wouldn't have. How she draws herself feeling when she's having her lows is quite telling. You see her brows are furrowed. Her thought bubble is almost like a storm, and you see that there's a buzz. Her cell phone is going off. Once again, smartphones at their fingertips. That's the power of the internet with Generation Z. Shows she has a new work email. She's clearly not happy about that email. And when people ask her if she's okay, you can see the duality. She's saying, oh, different day, same shit. And then over on the other side, she's angry, and immediately you can see that she is going to express herself. And she continues to do so throughout the book. She also discusses some of the drugs that she comes in contact with and works with at the pharmaceutical industry. And some of them are drugs that we're seeing daily on commercials. And I feel like sometimes, especially with Generation Z, they can go to the doctor, and we've become a very drug dependent society. We think there's a pill for everything. And so this is how Rachel describes the people that might be taking these types of medicine. Back in the day, 20 years ago, when I was a nurse, Zoloft was big, Effexor was big. Today, it's Latuda and Cymbalta. Most of you have likely heard the commercial about those, but I thought that it was interesting how she portrays them as wind up people. If you look at the Zyprexa, you almost have a zombie-like person. Down at Effexor, they're just losing their entire face, detached from reality. A lot of different meanings that you could get from looking at the various drawings here and the medications that a lot of our young adults are exposed to. When she does describe her manic episodes that clearly land her in the hospital, because 11N, that's probably 11 North, which is a wing in a hospital or possibly a psychiatric unit. And Lindsay, Rachel, it's clear that this is a chart. And she's looking and describing what she thinks they might see as her manic episodes. And you see so many different moods and feelings in these 9 pictures. There's a lot of the F word use in this book, but this is her story and how she describes being a prisoner, not only of the disease, but also of her medications and just her life in general. And she has been on book talks and talking about these various episodes. And I feel like this is also something that could really reach out to Gen Z, because the more that they feel stressed and anxious, and while they try, health for them is all about a holistic approach. They tend to eat healthier, they tend to want to exercise more, and they're really looking at it as a holistic approach, which is a good idea. But they also still complain about mental health issues more so. And so it could be very easy for them to be diagnosed and medicated, and they could relate with these types of works very easily. I also dug up some COVID-19 Gen Z comics. And the first one that I looked at is this young man who is all alone, hiding behind his recliner. And you see that there are ads on the TV, and there's just so many things being said here. We're here to help. Let's stay connected. Some somber piano music. Together, yet he's alone. So I think isolation can be a trigger for some Gen Z, even though they have the internet at their fingertips. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're not experiencing anxiety from COVID that we're going through right this minute. I think this says a lot, especially for those of us at schools, universities, colleges, and for those of you out there that are Gen Z that graduated this year. We likely didn't have in-person graduations, but if there was some semblance, you're wearing a mask, they're wearing gloves, they hand you the diploma, but just so you know, the world's on fire. This is what you have to look forward to, my new adult. And I really thought that just spoke to me about what is happening and what some of the thoughts are among our students that will be entering college in just a few weeks. So even with Generation Z, I would propose to you that graphic medicine aimed at them will increase their health literacy. We have some things that we already know. We know that when you put pictures and text together, it's going to increase the brain's perception and understanding. We know that pictures can cross language barriers, even though we might have some cultural barriers that pictures are not going to cross. And we can get the information out there easily by pamphlets, comic strips on one page. So, for example, if I really wanted to reach Gen Z, our new student population that's coming in, and I really needed to make sure that they understood how important masks were and facial coverings, I could very cost effectively print out 250 sheets of a comic of somebody putting on their mask or their bandana improperly, and kind of make it a light-hearted thing and hand that out, and it wouldn't cost very much, and people would know how to effectively and properly wear their face covering. Same with hand washing. So many different things that we could very easily get out to our demographic very cost effectively. Some of the issues that I feel especially relevant to Gen Z are that pictures are subjective and symbolic, and they're going to mean different things to each reader. Depending upon what they've been exposed to is depending upon how they're going to perceive those comics in front of them. Also, content can be challenged. So let's have a scenario. John Doe comes to college. He gets, let's say, the RX book, takes it home, and he's reading it. And maybe his parents browse through it and they see the F word 14 times. And that's just not something that they're okay with. Think of the tension and the issues that could cause. So content can be challenged even in an academic setting, but most especially in a high school or younger setting, or even counseling clinics and different types of areas outside of what we kind of feel in academia we're a little safer from, but not always. We have banned books every year. So content can be challenged, and that could too become a stressor for our Generation Z. We still have the old stigma that's associated with comics as kids reading. Same scenario. There's some comic books that have been printed out about different types of nursing procedures, let's say. And they take it home, and dad's like, I'm not paying $8,000 a semester for you to read comics, because maybe in dad's generation that was. I think it's getting better. I don't think we're really associating that stigma. I think it's decreasing because we do have legitimate classes now, so to speak. And I just had air quotes, even though you can't see them. The stigma is a lot less now because there are more and more classes where people are learning about graphic novels and comics and how they really discuss what society is thinking at the time and how they can teach different things. For our demographic, though, we really need more studies to prove that these types of work are affecting our demographics that we're talking about, in this case, Gen Z. So we need to get out there and do studies with this generation, get them to read these and find out, do you feel or can you show us how this has increased your health literacy? So we've got to have some studies to prove that this is working. And this goes for all demographics, not just Gen Z. And so why should we add these types of materials to our classes, clinics, and libraries, even though we know they might be challenged? I think it's more important that we use this to allow people to learn about specific types of diseases and outcomes that is a personal story, and really give you an understanding of society's impression of their healthcare journey. I think that might be a little bit more important than worrying about, oh my gosh, there's a nude picture in this book. It might not be appropriate. It might be challenged. Even though that is an issue, I think it's more important for us to provide good information to our Gen Z population. Because they do experience increased anxiety, sometimes they also have feelings of isolation, especially if they have some type of illness or some type of healthcare issue. For example, in the 80s and early 90s, it was HIV and AIDS. With millennials, it was herpes and chlamydia. Years ago, baby boomer and before, you had gonorrhea and syphilis. Those had very real stigmas associated with them. And people that were affected by these, they weren't out readily talking about them. There was a lot of shame involved. And they might not have been able to find anything that they could relate to besides a couple of paragraphs in a textbook or something that really didn't make them feel that they could relate to or connect with. So it will help feelings of isolation because of stigmas associated with some illnesses. And then finally, the price. It is very, very cost effective to teach this way versus $500 textbooks or $200 textbooks or any type of information that is a lot. And when you start talking about healthcare, everything is expensive. And this is one way that we can provide effective information in a very cost-effective manner. So if you're interested in learning more about graphic medicine, there are a lot of things that are available to you. Since we know that YouTube is exceedingly popular, there are hours upon hours of videos available. If you just do a search on graphic medicine on YouTube, you'll find not only my little video, but well over 100 others. In many libraries, you have the Graphic Medicine Manifesto, and it's also available, of course, in Amazon and other areas. It's a really great starting point, not only for students that are interested in graphic medicine because it's broken down into various essays, but it also kind of introduces you to the people that got the whole thing started of graphic medicine. And this is them on the front of this cover, and you'll see some, cartooning going on in there as well. There's a very, very great graphic medicine website called graphicmedicine.org. Depending upon what way you learn, there are book reviews, there are podcasts, blogs. It will take you to videos. There is a sister Spanish website called Grafica Medicina, where you can learn about the different types of graphic medicine works that are in Spanish. There's also a monthly virtual get-together where there's a topic, and even if you don't draw, you can join in and you can meet others that are passionate about graphic medicine and its contribution to society and what I feel will be a much larger contribution in the coming years. But these are places that you can start. And if you're really interested, if you are a Facebooker, there's a great graphic medicine book on Facebook. Many people that are here today and have attended my other presentations, I met on Facebook, and I always put links in the graphic medicine group. If you are a Twitterer or a tweeter, as they say, look up graphic medicine on Twitter, Instagram. And you can always contact me if you are interested in specific types of information. If I can't find the answer, the great group of people that I have the pleasure of talking to on Facebook, we can certainly reach out to them. And so that is the end of my presentation today. I want to thank you for coming. I'm so excited to have my second in my series. There'll be more coming. And I want to just open the floor to questions.
Hello, everyone. So far, we have not received any chat questions, but we are looking and seeing if there's anything. Mr. David L. Brown said, "Thank you for this. My library owns the first 2 graphic novels, so I plan on ordering the other 2. If you follow this presentation, I have placed the links to Amazon in the chat for the books that she featured in this video. So you can certainly click there and get the books." Marina Hout said, "Enjoyed." Heather Adams Sisson said, "Great job, Jamie." So we had a good bit of followers. Thank you so much for following. I do have a few questions before we're done that I came up with just to give people the time to maybe ask questions themselves. My first question is, how does the medical profession feel about graphic novels today, and where do you see it going?
So right now, as a whole, the medical profession lacks buy-in to graphic medicine. However, I think that the more people that do presentations like this and purchase and create graphic medicine discussing their story, the more buy-in that we're going to have. I feel especially confident about our Gen Zers that are in college right now, because just last semester I worked with my nursing faculty. They were very interested in showing their students the patient's perspective, and that's how I began ordering our graphic medicine work, so that students would be able to read those, and the nursing students could read about, just like we saw, perhaps bipolar disorder. I ordered that one, and I made a guide so that the students could go and look at it. I feel like right now, with our Gen Z population, this is the time to start focusing on graphic medicine, giving them the information so that they can see its value. They will take that with them into the professional healthcare industry, and then I think by proxy it will grow and is growing from there.
Right. I'm going to place her contact information underneath this real quick so everybody can have her email. She is available for other presentations as well. So if you would like her to do a live presentation like we did today with your university or your library or wherever you're at, she's available. Let's see, I've got another question. What research exists about medical graphic novels? Is anybody doing a study or pursuing seeing the influence and putting it in something that's measurable?
There is, I didn't find a lot specifically for Generation Z, but I did find information studies that were done on adolescents in the early 2000s. I also found some that there is research out there, but we need more definitive research. There are some universities that are offering graphic medicine classes right now. In my experience, the majority of them are up in the northern states. And so those classes, I feel like, have an opportunity to do more research. Now, it is growing. There is research being done. I did research just in the last few days trying to see what kind of research had been done on Generation Z and graphic medicine. And while I didn't find a whole lot, it was more millennium-based. I did find research that students and different demographics are given the information. They're given comics, they're given different types of books, and then there's been studies and questionnaires and different types of things done, but it's not very much. And I think we need to really focus on doing a lot more.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Jamie. We appreciate you doing this presentation with us. If you'd like to see anything further, we do have other events and things. And anytime Jamie has something great and new to present, we will certainly be the first one on the bandwagon to invite her to come and present with us. If you want to get in touch with us, our Facebook page is facebook.com/USA Libraries Art Galleries. We're always interested in anything artistic and creative and libraries and making that great connection in the community. Thank you so much, Jamie. We appreciate everything you do and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you and
Bye-bye.
have a bye.